What's going on, guys? It's Craig with Tech 360, and today I'm going to answer some questions that I've had on my pool painting videos. Alright guys, first and foremost, thank you for clicking on this video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and let's get into it. So, this video is going to be about some of the pool videos that I've had that I've made in the past of basically repainting a plaster pool, making repairs on the plaster pool. But I'm going to focus more on the painting side because I seem to get a lot of questions over that. So I hope this kind of helps you out. Get a little more in detail on some of the things that I've had, the questions that I've had. So the number one question I have had when it comes to prepping a pool is, what sanding wheel did you use? So all I did is I went to Home Depot. I bought a big hand grinder. That's all I did. I didn't use a grinder wheel. Don't use a grinder wheel because you'll really gouge the plaster. I just used I think they're by a company called Diablo. They were like 10-inch just sanding wheels. And I used the grittiest one I can find. The gnarliest grit I can find, because I really wanted to get in there and really scuff that surface up of the whole pool. I didn't want to do it too fine, because if you do it too fine, it makes it real slick and it gives kind of less for the primer and the paint to stick to. So I wanted to really rough that plaster up pretty good. And you don't really want to gouge it. You just kind of want to take it and just like in some of my videos that I have, you just kind of just run along the side of it. You just basically want to skim the surface of it up. And then some people say, well, when I did it, it really gouged up the plaster, and it really, left all the little swirl marks and stuff. And that's fine. That's totally fine, because if you do it right, once you paint it, once you prime it, and then you come back in within 12 hours after priming it, and then you put your first coat of paint on, let it sit for a minimum of 12 hours, but no more than 15. You come back and paint it again. And once you get those layers of paint on there, it's going to fill all those cracks and scratches in anyway, so you're not going to see them anyway. Another one is, I was responding here recently to a guy, is that when you go to paint your pool, okay, now once you've basically you've kind of sanded it, scuffed it, you've done your acid wash, TSP, or for what it's called, it's been a while since I've used it. Anyways, once you wash it down and rinse it, you really want to make sure that plaster is dry. I mean, not like, oh, well, I'm sitting out in the sun, I'm gonna let it sit for a couple hours, let it dry. No, you need to let that thing dry for at least a good 2 or 3 days, like especially in the sun, because the thing is about plaster, it's very porous. Water gets down in it. Yes, you can let it sit for a couple hours and it'll dry, but all the water that's down into that plaster, like down deep in that plaster, is still there. And you want to make sure all that is out. And you want to make sure all that water is out, because what's going to happen is once you go and you primer that pool, okay, well, once that primer dries, now that's just like an airtight seal, okay, over that plaster. And then you come back and paint it, you spend all your time on it, whether you paint designs on the bottom, whatever it may be, spend all this time doing it, you give it a couple months, and this water that's still got left in the plaster that didn't dry out starts to evaporate now. Okay, well, when it evaporates, what does it do? It gives off kind of a gas, like air, basically. Now it's going to make an air bubble. It's going to make an air pocket under your epoxy. And now what that creates now is what we call a blister. So it's basically a raised air pocket, a pocket of air under that epoxy paint. And as soon as somebody runs their foot across it, or steps on it, or hits it with something, whatever it may be, starts poking at it, whatever, curious kids, those are going to see something, they're going to start poking at it. Once you get a hole in it, and it pops and water gets back into that plaster, keep in mind, plaster is very porous, so once it hits that plaster, it's going to start traveling through all those little pores, and it's just going to spread all under the pool. And then give it a couple weeks, a week or two, all that plaster in that pool is going to be soaking wet again under that paint. Now it's going to start coming loose, or it can come loose. It may not, but it can come loose. So you really want to make sure your plaster is dry before you go to paint it. Next thing, so some people say, hey, I've epoxied my pool. I've let it dry for a couple weeks. Now I want to go back and paint a design on it. Okay, on the bottom of the pool. Well, I don't have a exact expert advice on how to do that. I have done designs on the bottom of the pools. I've painted logos, whatever, or pictures or whatever it may be, designs, so forth and so on pools. But the way I've always done it is if I'm painting the entire pool, I find out from the customer what they want, all the colors, I have everything there and I have it ready. So once I do my first coat of paint, let it dry 12 hours, come back, do the second coat of paint, I let it dry for about 12 hours. Then I come back in and then I do my design. And I'll paint whatever it is and I use all the same, whether like let's say you're painting the bottom of your pool blue, then you know the epoxy paint, now you want to come back in with you want to make sure you use epoxy because it'll adhere to that epoxy paint. But from what I understand and what I have read, I've heard where people had nightmares where they had or gotten themselves into nightmares where they've allowed that epoxy paint, their main color of the pool, dry too long, and it's pretty much cured out, and now it's hard. It's a hard surface, and they go to paint a logo, a fish or dolphin or whatever on the bottom, and you give it a couple months and it starts flaking off and coming off because it's not sticking to the epoxy. Well, there is a little time frame. There's a small time frame where that epoxy paint that you paint on the bottom of your pool, it's curing, but it's not completely cured out. And they say it's a 12-hour minimum wait and no more than 15 hours. Right there in that window is where you want to add your other color or whatever, because it's dry, but it's not. Anything you add on top of it will adhere to it and it will stick to it. So you want to, like I said, it is tricky, and there is a little time frame that you have to kind of work in between, or it may not work right now. You may be able to work later. You may be able to let it dry for 2 or 3 days, then come back, and then paint right on top of it. And it may stick. I don't know. I haven't done that. I've always just do it all at one time, and I do it in my little time frames, just so I know for sure that's how, because what I read and what I've read and done in the past, that's what's always worked for me. I never had no issues with it. Next thing, somebody's asked me, hey, after I painted my pool, I got it all nice and painted, and I went by and I was kind of, I went to clean it for the springtime to get it ready, and I started scrubbing the walls, and now my the paint's it's all scarred up and scratched up now. Okay, well, once you go to epoxy paint, throw out your wire brush, because some of you guys, I know y'all use those wire brushes to scrape the walls to get the algae off the walls that set, it gets hung up on the walls and stuff like that, just to stir everything up. Throw out your wire brushes, get the plastic brushes. Don't use the wire brush on epoxy paint, or you will scratch it all up, or you can pop little holes in it, the water gets under it, it's horrible. Do not use wire brushes on epoxy paint. Use the plastic bristle brushes, and that'll save your issues with that. Then I've had a question, they say, how long did it take you from start to finish, to paint this pool? Well, if it's just painting alone, that's not including all the prep work beforehand. If it's just painting from dropping the primer in the bucket, mixing the hardener, and then painting it, it probably took about a good, probably 2.5 days. And that's just because, maybe a little bit longer. It's because there's one day, like I'll get in the morning, I'll put the coat of primer on, and I leave. Okay, I'll let it dry all day, and I come back the next morning, then I put my first coat of paint on. Okay, I let it sit all day, and I leave it. Come back the next day, and the next morning around the same time, put the second coat of paint on, and then let it sit. So yeah, I guess about 3 days. It depends on how many coats you're gonna put on it. Sometimes more coats the better, sometimes not. Okay. Then I've had another one where they said, or they've asked where it's okay, hey, I painted my pool, and I just got it done yesterday and I'm filling it up today. Okay, well, they all say when you paint your pool, the longer you can wait to fill it up, the better. If you can wait 2 or 3 days or let that paint just cook and bake in the sun, that's perfect. Now I understand if you live in some parts of the states where the ground's real saturated and wet, you don't want to leave the pool empty very long, because it can raise the pool out of the ground and bust all your pipes, and you might as well just call a backhoe in and just fill it in, because it's going to cost you more money than what it's worth, to fix it. So, if you live in a predominantly dry state where the ground is mostly dry, and you can leave your pool empty for a few days, do so, because like I said, the longer you let that paint set and cook in the sun, in the heat, the better off you'll be and the longer it'll last. Another one was, hey, so I painted my pool, so this means that, I don't have to get the plaster redone anytime soon, right? Okay, well, I'll tell everybody the same thing. The plaster or the epoxy paint over a wore out plaster pool is only a Band-Aid, okay? You can do it, and it'll kind of preserve what's left of your plaster for a few years, maybe if you do it right. I say usually average about a year, get you by another year or two, but usually I tell people, if you got bad plaster, you got bad spots, just go ahead and break them out, and either you do it yourself, which I have videos as well of me doing that, showing you how to do that, how to fix all those bad spots so you don't have to tear out the whole pool, or you can call a company in, and it usually averages in between about $11,000 to $17,000 to have it done. And that's basically come in, they chisel out all the plaster out, they get it down to the concrete bowl, and then they come back and they haul all that out, then they come in and they reshoot your whole pool. It does take a little bit, it's kind of messy, but then you'll know it'll last for several more years, because plaster on a pool does have a lifespan. It doesn't last forever. I think they say average is about, I think it's like 15-20 years, I think, on a plaster pool, and it's about time to chisel it out and then put a new plaster on it. Because what will end up happening is that the plaster will start seeping, obviously, and it gets down into the concrete, and if with the ground shifting and such, your concrete bowl of the pool itself will start creating cracks. Well, then once it starts cracking, and if you got a crack in your plaster as well, the water gets down under your plaster, gets down to concrete, then now it starts getting under the concrete of your pool, and it creates a bubble of water. Well, then in time, that can, and that doesn't always happen, but it can in time start pushing that and floating that pool out of the ground. It usually doesn't. As long as your pool has water in it, you'll be fine on that aspect, I think. But first time you go to drain this pool and you go to do like just a yearly maintenance or whatever it may be on this pool, you may run into some issues. So like I said, the plaster is a key part of your pool that you want to make sure you take care of. It does serve a purpose. Then they said, okay, so how much does it cost to paint a pool? Okay, well, if you do it yourself, just the paint alone, I think I bought on one of my last jobs, I did about 5 gallons. 5 gallons of blue, and then it was like 5 gallons of primer, and then you have to get the quart of activator with it as well. But usually if you buy the primer, it comes with the activator, so it all comes together, so you don't have to buy it separately usually. If I remember correctly, all the paint I think ran about $550, about $550. But if you go to do it for somebody else on the paint, I mean, you can, you do $550 with the labor and everything else you tie into it. I mean, you can charge up in the thousands, to do it for somebody. But you want to make sure you do it right, because if you go in and say, oh, okay, cool, I can make a quick couple thousand, I go paint this lady's pool, and do this like that, I can knock it out real quick, man. I pay $500-600 in materials. I can go paint this pool and have it done in a couple of days. I can make $2,500 in a couple of days. You can, but you've got to be careful. Now, the reason why I say, because that's when you start coming into issues. If you don't know the pool and you don't know any issues with the pool or any of the previous issues with this pool, that can come back and haunt you, especially if you're not with a company and you don't have like an LLC or any kind of insurance like that. You're just a little independent guy just trying to make some little cash on the side. Where that can come back and bite you is, like, let's say, this lady, she's known that they've had, a water leak under this pool, and you didn't know it, okay? Or you known that they have water under their plaster or whatever it may be, a lot of blisters and stuff under this plaster, and you don't know it, okay? And you go and paint this pool, and you give it about 3 or 4 months, you're in the clear, the money's gone, you've already spent it on whatever it may be, and now she calls you up, hey, this paint's flaking off now, I don't know what's going on, you got to come back and fix it. Well, you're like, well, I got to come back and fix it. Well, you did the job, you got to fix it. And that's where it can kind of become a headache, having to go back and make repairs on people's pools. That's why usually if you do it, you want to make sure you type up some, especially if you're just like an independent guy, you need to type up some kind of contract of some sort that states that, you do not, that they understand that you don't know the history of that pool. You don't know if there's cracks in the concrete. You don't know if there's been any previous leaks, and you do not guarantee this to last because you flat out don't know the history of it. So, like I said, you just got to be careful, on how you do things. But for the most off, guys, that's about all I've had. If you have any other questions or comments, comment below, and I'll do my best to respond to you guys, or I can make another video later on. If you want another video on something else, please let me know, and I'll do my best to make it. Till next time, guys.